We just talked about the variety of methods we can use to override output in Drupal and how to determine which ones to use. Now I wanted to narrow this question down a little bit and discuss how we would decide whether to put some code in the theme layer or in a module, because sometimes we can do either, but it makes sense to do one or the other, and how do we decide where it's supposed to go? This question is going to come up for the most part when you're working on an individual site and the site has a custom module that takes care of some glue code. It's not something that you would port between multiple sites, but it's something specific for this site. And then you have your custom theme as well. So one use case for this question is to override a theme function in your module or to override it in the theme layer, because you could do both. So how do you decide where that's going to go? In my experience, this boils down to who you're working with. So let's take a look at what happens if you put it in your module. If you put the override in your module, are the people that you're working with going to then be modifying that theme function inside of that module? And if so, do they have the expertise to be able to work inside of a module without messing things up? So this is a question as to the skills of your team members. Are they more themers? Are they site administrators or people who own the site that are going to be going in and working with the code but not really knowing what they're doing? If so, then you may not want to put that in the modular layer. If you're going to be working solo and you're responsible for the code and no one else is going to touch that code except people who definitely understand how module structures work, then putting that code in the module might be easier for you to maintain in the long run versus having to first look in the module and then say, oh yeah, it's in the theme layer, and then going to the theme layer. So on the other hand, if we look at the approach of adding it in the theme layer, what we get is a more narrow range of what people can do to mess things up. So if our theme override is in the theme layer, it's in a file called template.php, which has a limited number of functions there, and they're all template overrides or helper functions for those theme overrides. And so the amount of damage that can be done in that file is limited. So you may want to put a theme function in there, or even convert it to a template file if you're really worried, and allow people to work with that template file or theme function on the theme layer. This will probably cover most cases where you have that choice to use the module or the theme. However, there's also the question as to whether to use alter hooks for certain aspects of the output to modify it, or to use a theming function. To decide which to use, the question you can ask is whether you want the changes that you make to be transferred to the theming layer. If so, then you probably want to make the change at the alter layer, where you're adding code or modifying the order of elements inside of a render array, for example, and you want to pass that then to the theming layer to allow the themer, or whoever is responsible for the output, to modify that in whatever way that they need to. If you use a theme override function in your module, then the only way to override that at the theme level is to override that theme function, which means copying that code and rehashing it in some way. So it's not a clean way of passing on granular changes to the content to the theme layer. It instead means that your changes have to be overridden in order to get the changes that somebody needs on the theme layer.